right, so welcome to the May PBIS Maryland webinar. I'm going to be meeting with you today to talk through elements of alignment and thinking through the framework of PBIS or MTSS and how the framework can help with that integration and alignment of initiatives that are pertaining to social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health supports for students in your schools. I want to lay a foundation and just a context, do some introductions, and then we'll get into content. I'm bringing this to you from PBIS Maryland at Sheppard Pratt. PBIS has a long history in Maryland and has a history of having multiple partnerships at the table to support this. Sheppard Pratt is continuing at this point to continue to provide some supports around PBIS in Maryland, including webinars and recognition and elements related to fidelity data. And I say that with our partners, but the real thing that we need to focus on is a foundation for PBIS in this state. And that really comes down to the school systems, comes down to all of those who have been implementing for years, some 20 some odd years, some fewer than that. But it really comes down to the dedication of the school systems to invest in frameworks that help support student success and support efficiency of systems in your schools that can ultimately support educators' quality of experience in the school buildings as well. So it really comes down to your efforts that have made PBIS last as long as PBI has sustained in Maryland. And I also applaud school systems across the country and other countries as well who have invested in this framework as a way to organizing their supports for students. And so that's what we're going to be talking today about, is what are those elements of PBIS that can help with alignment of the multiple initiatives that you have in your building. There are PowerPoint slides. The slides that I am sharing with you today are available on the PBIS Maryland website. I'm going to post that into the chat. And this is being recorded, like I mentioned. And we will have this recording posted on the website probably by the end of today. The videos the sessions that we did prior to this are posted as well. It took a little bit to get those transitioned over, but they are there now. So if you go to the PBIS Maryland website, the link is in the chat, but you're going to be looking to go to the coaches section on the website down to coaches meetings, and you will find a table there that includes the resources for this webinar and other webinars that we have done. I want to give you a little snippet about myself. Again, I see a lot of familiar names and faces. Some are new, so that's wonderful. As many people as we can get, and you can share this information and this link with others who might not have been able to attend at the moment, because it's not a wonderful time for everybody, right? To be able to pull away. And so I really value the time that you're taking today to spend with me. I am Jennifer Jeffrey Pearsall. I'm the director of the PBIS Training and Technical Assistance Center at Sheppard Pratt, and have been involved with PBIS here in Maryland, I think going on 6 or 7 years. Prior to that, I've worked in this area of multi-tiered systems of support for behavior as well as literacy for the past about 23 years. And I have spent most of my time supporting comprehensive schools, but a decent amount of time supporting alternative settings like juvenile justice settings, residential treatment, as well as alternative day schools. And I also, while adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities isn't my primary area of focus, I bring to the table to those systems the knowledge of implementation science and the concept of multi-tiered systems of support. And so I am supporting some of our Maryland adult supporting organizations in the state with their implementation of systems-wide positive behavior support, which is equivalent to your school-wide PBIS, just a different system. So I see you have already started following the directions that are on that slide and providing your name and your school system in chat, as well as your role. And if you could share something, I would love to get us sharing either in chat, or if you want to unmute, we have a smaller group today. So if you want to unmute, feel free to share an example of how you or others at your school were able to build connections this year. I'll start by sharing myself, and that was well, I don't work in a school. I visit schools and I work with administrators and teachers. I am also a mother, and I happened to attend a course event last night, or a choir event rehearsal for my son last night at his middle school. And the final event, the final song, included bringing all the 6th and 7th graders up on the stage. And then in the middle of the song, all the teachers came up and sang as well. And at the end of that, one of the teachers thanked the chorus teacher and said that in a year where they were having a lot of trouble making connections, the course teacher found a way to help make connections in the building. And I thought it was a wonderful example of how events and pulling together around small but significant activities can help build connections. So I wanted to share that. I thought that was a wonderful example of building connections in a time where it's really challenging to build connections in schools. So if you could share, that would be great. I see names and systems here. Great. And Crystal, I see you model connections before content during all student service meetings, including PBIS, RP, and LSCI meetings. Excellent. Jessica, you shared that yourself and your community school have held Motivate Me Mondays related to mental wellness, connection, and ways to build resilience with staff. Excellent. So ways to build those connections with staff. Other examples that anyone wants to share, and I'll go through as well. I think I probably have missed some. Morning breakfast and lunch buddies, definitely. That's great. Thank you, Tova. All right, I'm scrolling through and see if I missed anything or anybody. So lunch bunches, thank you. Faith is selling us circles.
Yep, didn't even have enough for you, did they?
All right.
That's all.
And excellent. So if you think of things, staff versus student basketball games, now they sound like a lot of fun and a great way to build those connections with staff and staff to staff, student to staff, community building activities with staff and students. I know this year has been challenging to make those connections. And so all these elements of connections are really excellent to hear you share. So I appreciate it. Thank you. And if you have more, keep them coming. If I missed something, drawing with a student that I observed. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about what we're going to get into today. I'm going to share with you some core elements of PBIS or MTSS, kind of just touch on that big picture, take us away from some of the practices and get into the more kind of implementation science types of elements of PBIS as a framework that can help support the alignment of initiatives, and I'm going to take it from the SEL, mental health, behavioral arm. Same could be true for the academic arm, literacy, math, etc. I'm going to focus on the social, emotional, behavioral arm. I'm going to describe systems to support alignment. So I'm going to give you two kind of systems elements that help with alignment. Some of you have probably already seen these. So feel free to unmute and share or post in chat how you've gotten creative with some of these systems elements that I'm going to share with you today. And then I'm going to detail one practice to support alignment and see if we can get you thinking about how that might apply in your setting. Right? So when we talk about alignment, some things that we want to consider, or why we invest in alignment, or why we should put some time into focusing on alignment of initiatives, is that we often have multiple initiatives and programs that are aimed towards the same goal, and it's really hard to do all of them separately, all of them very well. So we're promoting efficiency to that process. We often find that there's overlap between different initiatives and programs. We also want to make sure that when we think about alignment, the aim is to promote that efficiency, is to promote how we are organizing ourselves as a system, as an educational environment, so that there's more better use of time, and that when there is overlap, that there's kind of a merger or an integration, if you will, in how we can support the collective goal that we're aiming to obtain. And then we also want to make sure that we're providing students what they need to be, how they, what they need in order to be successful. And that's where our understanding of evidence-based and promising practices come into play, how these work together, and also thinking about how we're implementing these interventions and strategies to a high level of fidelity. So I'm going to talk to you about the big ideas of PBIS as a framework to support alignment. Again, taking us away from a little bit of the practices that we sometimes associate with PBIS. I want to just see in the chat, what are some things that come to mind, terms, principles, practices, et cetera, when you think PBIS or MTSS, whatever language you use in your system, you think about school-wide PBIS. What are some things that automatically come to mind, either for you or perceptions and thoughts that you think staff have about PBIS? Data, excellent, Stacy, thank you. What other things come to mind? Incentives and token economies, yep. And I think that's a big one that comes to mind when we think about PBIS, right? When the term PBIS comes up, we typically lean towards that incentive and token economy. Stacy, as well as data, kindness cards, problem solving, and teaching. Faith, one more thing to do. Yep. And Jennifer, tier 1 interventions, behavior change. So a range of things here. And we do typically fall into the practice element of PBIS, thinking about all of the one more things that we need to do, or the recognition process, and thinking about how we need to implement the different practices associated with PBIS. I want to take us back to kind of the big picture of the implementation logic associated with positive behavior support, or a way of work that I've heard some teams and administrators talk about PBIS as, the implementation science elements of PBIS as being the way of work that guides team meetings. And so we're going to talk about those valued outcomes today. And alignment really requires that we think about, what is that outcome that we're trying to align around? What is that valued outcome, in which we have multiple initiatives that we're working with in order to achieve an outcome associated, or outcomes associated with that priority. And in order to do that, we're looking at our data, right? So our data help guide where we need to invest our time and energy, where we need to be putting more efforts in, or different efforts in order to achieve those outcomes. And you can feel free to start plugging in some outcomes that you're trying to achieve in that social, emotional, behavioral, mental health realm of your school system, or your school, your district, wherever you're coming from. And so our data help guide us as to where our strengths are, but also where our needs are. And when we identify where our needs are and where we want to grow, where we want to help support students, how we want to help support students, then we are able to select evidence-based practices. And a thanks for kindness, tolerance, safety, and frustration tolerance. Those are some of those real specific outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Thank you. Then we look at, what are those practices? What are the practices that we need to pull from in order to achieve those outcomes, like kindness, safety, frustration tolerance, or whatever your valued outcome is. And we might have a variety of practices at our disposal that we don't need to tap into all of them at all the time, but we do need to tap into certain practices, certain elements of practices, in order to achieve the outcomes at that time. The other thing that we think about too with this implementation logic, with the framework of PBIS or MTSS, is the systems elements. And when I talk about systems elements, I'm talking about what are those things? What are the things that we need to have in place in order to support high fidelity implementation? So do we have teams? Do we have a team? Do we have multiple teams? We'll talk about teams in a minute. Do we have the people in the building who can help look at data and match practices and strategies to the outcomes that we need to achieve that are data informed? Do we have processes in place to then collect information about how well we're implementing those practices? And do we have processes in place in order to determine how we're collecting data around the implementation and the impact of those practices? So we talk about teaming a lot with the systems and teams that can, those data teams that help really review those data, or their goal, their aim is to review those data in order to identify areas of need and strength, and then select practices to help in those areas of growth. The other element is coaching and technical assistance and training, and being able to have the adequate amount of time and support so that the practices that you're asking staff, whether it's teachers or instructional support staff or more clinical types of staff that you have in your building with implementing those strategies, do you have the proper training and then follow-up technical assistance that's needed? And so that's that kind of thought process. No matter what your outcome is, you could plug in improve early literacy skills if you're in elementary school, and you would go through the same process. You would need to, your data would inform what skills you need to work on at different levels. Then you figure out what are those evidence-based practices that need to put in place. And then how do we, what is our teaming around making those decisions? How do we collect data around implementation and outcomes? How do we provide training and technical assistance support to our teachers who are implementing those strategies, or anybody who's implementing those strategies? So that's the logic. Within the other element of an MTSS or PBIS tends to be that tiered model, right? That what we borrowed from the public health world and continue to lean into is the continuum of evidence-based interventions and supports. And so you can see here that in order to have this continuum of supports, or that layering of supports, we also need to invest in teaming. So it goes back to those concentric circles. We need to have screening and progress monitoring, so data elements, in order to identify the areas of need and monitor progress along the way. We need to make sure we have those practices and a range of practices that can be provided across a continuum of supports. And those need to be evidence-based instructional practices, as well as making sure that we have evidence-based instruction, assessment, and interventions in place. That data is a critical component that we problem solve. We continue to monitor implementation of our practices. We continue to monitor the outcomes associated with those practices. And all throughout this should be the integration of school family partnerships and community partnerships in order to really help support alignment at its full. And we bring community members in, we get a whole different set of data, right? We can bring in community data to really understand what our students are experiencing, the whole child, the whole experience, and how that could be impacting their performance in school. When we put this together, we end up with, whether you call it PBIS or MTSS, we end up with this robust data making framework. Regardless of the specific interventions and strategies that you have in place, when you pull together the concentric circles here with that continuum of support, you end up with a framework that helps you organize through that data-informed lens, high fidelity implementation of the effective practices that you have in place. And you might have a range of effective practices at your disposal, but what we need to be doing is using our data to identify need, thinking about then what do you need to do what practices do you need to have in place and for whom? So, or do we need to have practices in place for all students, some students, or few students? And then how do you provide support to those implementing those practices, and then how do you evaluate whether the practice itself is being implemented with fidelity? And if so, how's that implementation of a practice impacting your desired outcomes? Right. I'm going to pause for a second for any questions or comments. If I've worked with some administrators and leadership teams that use the concentric circles that are on the left of the slide in every team meeting as a guidepost for how they work through a problem-solving logic. What I will also do is, it's not posted now, but I will post it after the session today. We have a worksheet that helps go through that process, just prompt some questions along the way that can be used during team meetings, whether it's, again, a team meeting associated with social, emotional, behavioral outcomes or other outcomes that you're aiming towards. All right. So let me move into talking a bit more about alignment. And for those who have joined, again, I am going to put the link to the slides in the chat, so everybody should have access to them now. We're going to go through how to approach alignment work, and there are some standard steps. I've talked about teaming. Teaming needs to guide this process. I will share with you a strategy for looking at your teaming structure and making sure that there isn't a lot of overlap or multiple teams working towards the same outcome. Talking about once you have that team in place, you need to understand what is your valued outcome that you're working towards, and then figure out the teaming around that, that you inventory the resources that you do have. And then you look for a plan for alignment of priorities, implement that plan, and complete the priority inventory and alignment annually. So it's an ongoing process. I'm going to talk you through some of these elements today. So we're going to start by those valued outcomes. What are those valued outcomes? And here you can see that there's a visual that kind of depicts valued outcomes on the right, and it can be very global, in the sense of this was an outcome associated with promoting positive school climate and student social, emotional, behavioral well-being. You can see a lot falls under that bucket. You can have far more specific outcomes that you're working towards. This would be more of a global outcome that you could then operationalize a bit more. And then the different priorities or initiatives, rather, that will go into perhaps how we go towards achieving this outcome. And what we're aiming for is a well-integrated use of different strategies, and maybe leaning into different strategies at different times, depending on the need. But we often have multiple strategies at our disposal. And it's a matter of how do we weave these together so that there's efficiency, especially and specifically at the implementation end, or kind of the teacher end and the student end, right? So it looks and feels well aligned, well integrated, well put together. And so, improving school climate could be an outcome. There we go. Decreasing bullying behavior could be an outcome. Improving social, emotional, and well-being can be an outcome. So I'm just curious, what is your social, emotional, behavioral goal for which you think you have multiple initiatives that you're trying to align around? So share with us as a community here today, what are the goals? What is the outcome? What are you trying to align around? And this could come and should come likely from your school improvement plan. One of those goals is typically related to some kind of social behavior for students. So feel free, unmute or put in chat what you're here to think about aligning around. What is that outcome? And if you want to share, you can unmute or you can raise your hand. I'm pretty flexible. We have a nice group here today that would work with being able to share. So what brought you to the table today? What, when you think about alignments, What are the things that you're trying to align, and what is the goal that they're that those initiatives are helping you achieve?
So,
Mhm.
Jennifer,
Yes,
hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
Oh, good. Good morning. It's Robin.
Hi,
I
Robin.
think for our school, and I'm only going to speak for myself right now, it's somewhat all of the above that you mentioned, but it's also, I think, just about, part of it is that self-regulation, attendance, even with the bullying, just all about, we can have kindness or whatever, just about, you know, emotional regulation. And I think, the same, it's across the board. So I think I can't really pick one that you're saying, because attendance, they're all, themes woven that I see at this school that, and the outcome are different, but I think the process might be what we need. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, and so you could have the umbrella of improved social emotional well-being for students. And there are different markers underneath it. It could be that you want to promote self-regulation, you want to improve attendance, right? Within that more global outcome or goal that you have set.
Right.
All right, we have a chat. Thank you, Robin, for sharing. Megan, you indicated that you work with several schools, and it's not necessarily a specific goal, but my goal is to help teams be more confident in social emotional regulation and using it daily in classrooms. Yes, and Megan, I'm sure if you looked at the school improvement plans, that goal to help promote social emotional regulation and self-regulation, it would align with one of those goals. And so a big thing here is to think about what are those school improvement goals that you have. Crystal, you have RP, PBIS, LSCI, trauma-informed, CEFL second step alignment, so that building admin and staff start to view as aligned supports versus siloed initiatives. Like, how do all of these elements, how do all because we have so many evidence-based practices and strategies that we can pull from, that sometimes it's strategy overload, right? And it's like we don't need to bring in one more thing if we need to look about how we're doing the things that we have well, and if we're doing them in alignment or in conjunction with each other instead of competition with each other, because that's where this often falls apart. All right, Andrew, your school initiative is focused on being engaged in learning and being safe throughout the day. Yes, and so when you have something like being engaged in learning and being safe throughout the day, there are lots of practices, going back to, I'm going to take you back to, slowly take you back to this one right here. Actually, this one right here. When you have that kind of goal of being engaged in learning and being safe throughout the day, and you go back to the concentric circles, think to yourself,
Debbie put that in there. That's
what are those elements that we can, what are the practices that we have at our disposal that we can pull from?
Possible to mute
to help us with the alignment and integration. I'm going to mute some folks. My audio is really low on my end, so if you're trying to share and I'm talking over you, I apologize. Feel free to, I don't know, somebody interrupt me and tell me I'm talking over somebody. Otherwise, I just gave a quick mute. All right. Looking and Patricia, one school is working on decreasing the amount of time out of class for students. Yes, so increasing self-regulation and equipping students and teachers with the skill set around helping students, to self-regulate. Yep, self-regulation is a big one, because we're also asking ourselves, or the adults in the building, to be able to self-regulate every moment of every day as well in order to model those behaviors. So I want you to think about all of those goals that you're working towards and the different priorities and initiatives that you have, and thinking of, and I'm going to talk you through an alignment element now. So thank you for sharing those. And you can likely see through chat and through Robin's description here that you all have a lot of overlap in this area. So I'm pulling this from, I believe Terry Scott. If I'm quoting the wrong person, I apologize. It's either Jeff Sprague or Terry Scott. So I'll put both names out there for this garage sale principle. They can track me down if I'm wrong. The thing that when we think about alignment now, you have your kind of goals, right? The goals that you're working towards. And I want you to also reflect, I'm going to talk about teaming in a minute. If your goal is to help a school initiative to be engaged in, have students be engaged in learning and be safe throughout the day, are there multiple teams working towards that goal? Or can you find one centralized team that might have some subcommittees to help achieve that goal so that you're not over teaming the process? And so one thing that you want to be thinking about is, do we have a team that can kind of go through that balcony view and clean out your garage, right? Because your garage is basically all the initiatives, practices, grants that you have coming into your school. And sometimes our garages look like this, right? We look like we have multiple and a lot going on, right? And it's not necessarily well organized. It's more, this is more cluttered than siloed, but it's the equivalent of being siloed. And then what you want to be able to do is discuss all of those related initiatives currently being implemented and start organizing them in a way that makes sense to the team, but also makes sense to the students and to the staff. How do these work together, right? Instead of having bikes all over the garage, let's put bikes into one section of the garage to see how we can organize those together, all right? So it's kind of like taking your garage, cleaning it out, pulling everything out. And the way that you clean your garage, right? Think about it like this. Think about alignment like cleaning your garage. The way you clean your garage is you don't start moving things around in this garage and it miraculously becomes organized. You're going to take everything out of your garage and then pile it together. And possibly what you're going to do, and most likely what you're going to do, is when you start piling things together, you're going to find out that you have, 7 rakes, and you might not need 7 rakes. So you might get rid of a few rakes and keep a small number. So you're going to trim. You're going to get rid of a few things that you either don't work anymore. You might find that lawnmower up front is broken or outdated, and there's a new technology or new science out there. And so we can retire that lawnmower, and maybe we can replace it with something else that's in the garage that is more effective or works better. And so, there's the whole process of alignment is very much like cleaning out that garage. Once you get everything out, once you figure out what's working and what's not working, what needs to be retired versus what can continue to be effective in achieving your goals, then you're going to put everything back in a more organized manner so that it's visually and functionally more efficient to get access to the things in your garage, right? Or to the practices that you have in your school. All right. And a great time to do a garage sale and to organize your garage is as you get into the spring and summer, right? Which is a perfect time of the year for schools to be thinking about alignment, as students are transitioning out for the year and you have some time with just staff and your team at the end of the school year or over the summer to think and to really pull everything out of your garage and think about what can we sell? What can we donate? What don't we need anymore, right? What do we need to continue to invest in, and how do we organize it? This is a great time of the year to do that. One of the resources that I'll share with you, and again, I'll post this on PBIS Maryland. It's not posted there quite yet, but I will get that there for you. And feel free to use whatever templates help you with alignment. This is just one resource map. This is helping with that garage sale mentality. It's helping you think about how do we organize the practices that we have. So what you'll see here is I have different priorities, programs, initiatives, innovations is the word I'd like to use because it's neutral. So an innovation Could be you have tier 1 PBIS, RP or restorative approaches, SEL, check in, check out, CBIT, functional approaches. We are going to be able to think about some of those as a tier 1 strategy. So check in, check out typically isn't a tier 1 strategy. And what we end up doing is we do alignment across tiers. And when I share this full resource with you, then you will be able to pull this down on your own. I'm going to focus on some tier 1 initiatives or innovations right now. What I have here in this example of alignment kind of operationalizes the core elements of a tier 1 system. So what does the priority look like at tier 1? What kind of supports are provided to students? What is the evidence base or research base for this priority or innovation? What are the expected outcomes of the priority or innovation? To date, what results have been achieved through this implementing this priority? What team is responsible for coordination and oversight? How is implementation fidelity monitored? What data are collected, etc. All right, and I posted the link to the slides that are already posted on PBIS Maryland. So in the chat, you can access the slides. I will provide this as a Word document after the session today. So I want you to take a look here. We're going to do a little bit of practice, and I want you to take a look here and see where are there elements of alignment. I'll try to make this a little bit larger. It might be a little small. I don't know if I'm making it any larger or not, so let me know. And feel free to share with me your thoughts on what's looking like there's areas of synergy. You can see here that we have listed out what it might look like for social emotional learning, where there's classroom implemented lessons at tier 1. There's a common language around social emotional regulation. The school uses second step. We have the teams, the PBIS team, the district MTSS team, a school climate team. What kind of areas of synergy or overlap are you seeing within this template when you start listing out the different practices and how they address the different features of a tier 1 system?
The expected outcomes of the priority are similar across all 3, like with all the notes that it talks about, that reduction in office referrals and suspensions, reduction in suspensions, improvement in your school climate, which will also then result in reduction of suspensions. So you can see that it aligns across.
Yeah, so these all, thank you. These all address a similar outcome, right? And so when we think about alignment, we want to be thinking about what is our general outcome that we're trying to achieve, you know, and again, it could be school climate, and we're going to improve school climate through, like Robin has said, improving self-regulation, improving attendance, by reducing our reactive and exclusionary types of discipline procedures. And so that's definitely an area of alignment. All right. And then I'm going to try to note that on here. All right. So you see that area of alignment down here in the outcomes. So things like school climate, right? School climate. Being able to reduce out of school suspensions and things like that. All right, excellent. What else do you see in here as far as areas of alignment? One area that sticks out for me is this common language, community values, common language, right? And so are there ways that we can think about the the efficiency here? And the other thing I think about when we have similar outcomes is we have, looks like, different teams working, and the teaming might be associated with the initiative or priority versus the outcome. And is there a way in which that we can think about teaming around our valued outcomes, right? So that we don't have all of these multiple teams. Instead of teaming for initiatives, teaming towards those outcomes. Yeah, so Andrew, the PBIS team could handle the school climate as a target rather than two teams tackling the same problem. And, you know, and you can reflect to yourself, you can feel free to share, but my guess is that at some point in your career, and likely recently, that you have multiple teams in a building that are working towards the same outcome, but they're aligned with different initiatives. And so that's that siloed feeling. And if you're in a school like that, then know that you're in company, because a lot of schools, that's how teaming occurs frequently. But one way to consider this is, like Andrew suggested, is that you could have one team, whether you call it a PBIS team or a school climate team, it really doesn't matter, as long as the functioning of that team is around achieving a shared outcome. And then figuring out, how do we use all these different practices, those evidence-based practices, to help us achieve this outcome, right? Any questions or comments? And if anybody has gone through an alignment resourcing map like this, feel free to unmute and share, or share something in the chat. All right, I am going to, I need to get rid of all my annotations here. So I'm going to clear my drawings. There we go. We don't need those annotations on every slide. So again, thinking about how you're going to prioritize alignment, and it's thinking about the overall outcome. What are the common threads across priorities? What are those systems features that are in place that you need to be thinking about in order to promote alignment? And then also considering the practice features. And again, it's going in and organizing your garage and having that garage sale, getting rid of some things that you don't that don't serve your goals any longer, or just are not as effective. And thinking about the sources, data sources that produce overlap, where you can use language between practices that can be aligned, where professional development and curriculum can be aligned. Again, if you have separate teams working in accord to specific initiatives, then you're going to have an SEL training, an RP training, a PBIS training. Is there a way in which you have an overarching team that can think about, how do these work together to provide a training and then follow up coaching to staff on how these work together? Where's their similarities? And what are those core elements that need to be implemented? And if you have siloed teams, then you have, there we go. If you have siloed teams, then you're going to have the continuation of those trainings being siloed. This is an example of what you could do to audit your teaming. Again, this is kind of, again, like your garage sale example. You can do this with your initiatives, you can do it with your teaming, but thinking about what are the different teams that you have within your building. What do you see here in this example? What are some patterns that you see in this school? And also, do you see any similarities in your system around the teaming that you see in here? Ellen is very busy. Yes, Stacy, Ellen is very busy. And Patricia, I see your comment in here about the last slide, the conversation, simplifying PD outcomes for the whole year can work wonders. Yes. And Patricia, if you have examples of how you've done that, feel free to share as well. Yeah, the same people are on committees. Now, is this something that is unique to this school here? Or is this something that we still continue to find in our schools? Still in our schools. Yep, it is, and so this is from an administrator perspective, this is an area, again, this is a great time of the year to do that garage sale for your initiatives and your teamings and thinking about what does our teaming structure look like? Now, I know there are committee requirements, but we shouldn't let committee requirements guide how we organize ourselves around achieving valued outcomes for kids. So one thing to think about here is, what are the outcomes that these teams are trying to achieve? And again, can we align our teaming? And it's not saying, because having an overarching team that works towards improving school climate and decreasing referrals isn't necessarily, and also thinking about your strategic goal. If you're working towards the same strategic goal, like number 3, right? Goal number 3, improve climate, improve safety, improve behavior, implement a 3-tier framework. Those are all goal 3s in this your school improvement plan. Ellen is on many of those teams. Ellen's meeting a lot, likely around the same goal. And so if you're working around the same goal, why not have a team that works around that goal? And you can divide that team and organize that team in a way to help achieve the smaller steps to achieve that goal, so that you're not meeting more frequently, but you're meeting collectively and organizing your time during that meeting so that you're addressing the different needs that go into achieving goal number 3. And that could mean that there are multiple priorities in here or initiatives that go into this, but how do we organize that? So you have one team at the table talking about how are we going to implement strategies associated with achieving a positive school climate, and improving behavior. What are we going to do for, when it comes to disruptive behaviors, right? What are some strategies that we have? Right? And so when we think about teaming, you want to make sure that those are core elements here on the left-hand side are available to team or represented in teams. But think about teaming around your outcomes. And this circle should probably be more towards the left to your school improvement goals. It just was shifted the wrong way, right? So what I want, and I'll put this alignment document into the PBIS Maryland website resources for today, for the content today, so that you have at least a document to work from. Again, it's a good time of the year, especially from an administrative perspective, to be thinking about your teaming structure and what makes sense. I'm going to talk to you about one tier 1 practice. And before I do, Patricia, I see that you put in here some information that it was efficient to have 1 or 2 supporting actions for each goal. No more than that. Yes, if staff needed scaffolding and differentiated PD to reach those goals, you listed those and offered small opportunities to provide those. Yes, and so we often talk about that multi-tiered approach when it comes to supporting student behavior. We also need to be thinking about that multi-tiered approach when providing supports to staff, and Brandy Simonson and colleagues are doing a lot of research right now on MTSS professional development, or a multi-tiered system of support logic for professional development for staff. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to talk to you about tier 1 strategy, one that comes from PBIS. And I will say what I'm pulling from is that there's school-wide expectations, right? And a matrix that operationalizes what those school-wide expectations look like across your building. PBIS doesn't come in with a set expectations, a set matrix. You develop it on your own for your school. This is an excellent element to help with alignment. If you noticed RP, SEL, PBIS, you could probably put a few other ones in there, talk about consistency and common language, predictability, right? So why not use the matrix as a way to illustrate alignment and pull in language across initiatives? PBIS doesn't come with a language, comes with a framework and a structure for thinking about how do you define the parameters are, try to find 3 to 5 general expectations. This is be responsible, be respectful, be safe. I'm on the board for the Association of Positive Behavior Support. We have 3 to 5 expectations for our board meetings. They are not be responsible, be safe, and be kind, and be respectful, but we've defined them for ourselves to promote equity, to promote openness. And so what you want to be thinking about is, what is the core language for your building? And then how can you integrate some of these social emotional learning types of priorities within your matrix? So in this example, this is a classroom matrix example. There are definitely routines within your classrooms, entering the classrooms, how to transition, small group work. But there's also a predictable routine within your classroom of needing to self-regulate when I feel upset, right? Numerous times a day. I'll tell you, my daughter went to school today. She's in 4th grade. She has anxiety, and health is an issue for her sometimes. And so she needs, and they're doing a health lesson today on chronic diseases, one of her areas of concern. And so she has to engage in some self-regulation activities in order to be able to get through some of that content. And her teachers are helping her with that, giving her breaks. She's doing self-talk, she's doing deep breathing and things like that. So having an opportunity to integrate some of the social emotional learning elements into your matrix is a wonderful way to illustrate and to live the element of alignment. The other thing, we talked about bully prevention. That came up a few times. And so thinking about bully prevention and including that within your matrix as well. So again, in this instance, this school decided to say, if you see disrespect, because essentially bully prevention comes down to disrespect. So being able to put those elements into your matrix of the stop, walk, and talk. This just happens to come from Scott Ross and Rob Horner and colleagues on bully prevention intervention. And on the playground, it might look, and in the lunchroom, it might look like inviting those who are alone to join in as one of those bully prevention behaviors that kids can engage in that are also aligned with other elements of social emotional learning. The big idea here is that your matrix should not be just a compliance-based document of walk on the right-hand side of the hallway, raise your hand to speak, throw away trash. We definitely have some of those behaviors that we need to teach and reinforce, but your matrix is a way to really integrate those social emotional competencies across different routines and settings within your building. And so if you haven't done this yet with your teams, again, I would start with alignment around resource mapping and knowing what initiatives you have that are aligned with your valued outcomes, talking through and understanding your teaming process, that you don't have multiple teams or siloed teams, and then leaning into some of your core tier 1 practices to see where you can integrate and align so that it is feeling and it is intentionally aligned on a day-to-day basis in the classrooms with the students, with the teachers. All right. And so again, this is an example of how to incorporate some of those social emotional learning competencies within your matrix. So we're not just a compliance-based matrix, right? And that was never the intent of PBIS, but it certainly was a core element of supporting student behavior in schools. But we need to really incorporate, as we continue on, those mental health competencies and social emotional competencies. And then the other thing to think about are those common threads for teaching. So when do we do this? When do we make this matrix come alive? And so can we lean into our restorative approaches, community circles, or if you've invested in social emotional learning time, can we pull that in? Can we use elements from the matrix? Can we use data from team meetings to inform questions that we use during these times? And then also integrating through the instructional day so that it's not just at the cell time in the morning or during our community circles, but when it's part of that matrix, it's part of the everything's, going back to that one matrix that had, if I feel upset, here are things that I can do. Teachers prompt that, teachers model that. There are opportunities to engage in that kind of practice throughout the day, right? I'm going to move past the practice right now because we're at 2 minutes, and ask if there are any questions about alignment. The practice opportunity was going to be essentially thinking about where are your areas of alignment and integration at those tier 1 practices, and you can feel free to share that. But I also want to just open this up to any questions or comments or sharing of how this has worked for you. Yeah, I'll put the slideshow in chat, Greg, certainly. I just lost all my slides here. There we go. All right. Yeah, I'll put the materials in chat. I'm also going to put a evaluation in chat, but I'll put the materials in there first. Crystal, feel free to unmute, and I see your hand there.
Thanks. So Gretchen and I, we have been using that the classroom matrix to support staff in creating circle topics around their school-wide expectations. But thank you, I appreciate, and I will definitely use this idea of then taking it one step further and using the data to drive those questions, especially after they initially kind of come to a classroom agreement about, behaviors, expectations, and then really being able to target the things that they're seeing, students and teachers, using data. So I thank you for that suggestion, because we will definitely use that.
Yeah, good, great. Yeah, once you have the structures in place and the process in place, then what data do you pull from in order to inform the interactions that you're having and the questions that you need to be having with students. And that goes back to some of those core elements of MTSS or PBIS too. And that's that screening, ongoing understanding of what the needs are within your building. And when we talk about screening too, a lot of it is, wanting to understand those social emotional needs, more internalizing needs sometimes of students as well. Right. All right, Patricia, I see here that after you aligned your practices, you had to redefine roles and responsibilities, which was some of the most challenging work. Yes, and because it again, if in that one example, if you're teamed around practices, you are going to continue to be siloed, and you're going to have overlap. You're going to have people that have responsibilities that are similar in function, but just specific to a certain practice or initiative. And when you align, then you need to redefine everybody's kind of role and responsibility in this process. And that can be really challenging. If you have, I will put my email in here. If anyone has examples that they would like to share, then feel free to email those to me as well, and I can share those with others, or we can communicate about what you're doing and figure out the best way to either share those or highlight those. All right. Faith, yeah, you can reach out to me in that email address if you are looking at any kind of training at the building level. We can certainly do that. All right. Well, I thank you for your time. Some people are still on. We do have one more session that is on June 6th. The rest of these have been in, thanks, Crystal, are posted. The recording is posted now. It took a little bit. This recording will be posted soon. We're going to talk about perceptions of PBIS and MTSS at our next meeting in June. And then if you are a school and you're going for recognition, those are due by, you've got some data due by June 1st to PBIS Maryland. Look at your internal timelines. Badges are due. Applications are due June 30th. And so look at your internal timelines for that. And then I put the feedback evaluation form in there. If you have a few minutes to provide feedback, that would be great. You can give us some input on what you might like to see moving forward as well. That would be fantastic. So I appreciate your time. We're a few minutes over. Thank you for staying and sticking with me. And I wish you the best success as you are wrapping up this school year. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks so much. Good to see you, Kathleen.